All right, so we're going to get started. I think people are going to file in soon. But it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the annual Necati Ozisik Distinguished Lecture. And it's also great to have Dr. Renato Cotta back on campus here. He got his PhD here. I'll do a formal introduction in a minute. But before we get started, I want to give an opportunity to Dr. Hakan Ozisik, Dr. Ozisik's son, who also is an alumni and a Hall of Fame member in the department, to say a few words about Professor Ozisik and also how this all came about.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out to the lecture. It's really wonderful. This is the second one we're having. We had the kickoff last year, so this is a tribute to my father, Dr. Necati Ozisik. He was a professor here in the department starting in 1963. His bio is there on the handout, and he was a giant in the field of heat transfer. And this is really to honor his legacy and keep that going. So I'm pretty excited about this. And I'm not only excited about the lecture today, but super excited to have our special guest today, Dr. Cotta. Earlier this year, we were deciding on, what to do for the lecture. And I got an email from Dr. Ecad, and he said, gosh, Dr. Cotta, Renato is one of your father's students. And then I said, this is fantastic. I haven't seen him in years. And so anyways, we decided we're going to go ahead and do this. And so I'm super excited about that. And thank you, Dr. Ecad, for getting that going. So last time I was doing this, I talked about my father as a person. I'm not going to go over that this time. I just talked about the things. But one of the things I had really mentioned, the things that he was probably proudest of, and he enjoyed, was working with colleagues and especially his students and graduate students. And one of the things that I think he was the proudest of, he wouldn't say anything explicitly, but you could just tell he was kind of someone who would it was lead by example. I would say that's how I would phrase it. And one of the things he was proudest of was his students, his graduate students especially, and especially when the relationship went from advisor-student to colleague. And that, I tell you today, Renato is a perfect example of that, and he was really proud of that. And that, that didn't end at that point. I mean, there was always a relationship. I was there. Dr. Cotta and I were there. He was not Dr. Cotta at that time, but he eventually was in '85. We were both in Broughton Hall, and I think I was working on my master's at the time, and he was finishing up his PhD. But the relationship didn't stop at that point. There would be a lot of collaboration always in his office. And one of the things my father would always say was, Renato is one of his brightest and hardest working students. But that relationship continued beyond that, whether it was going over to his house for dinner or they would come over to our place. So there was an interaction that went on. And so that, that certainly continued after the colleague and professional and then personal relationship continued, whether it was my father going out to Brazil as a lecturer there. And that's just really a wonderful thing. So I'm really excited. This is very special. It's personal. And I'm really excited about Dr. Cotta being here today. And with that, I just want to go ahead and hand it back over to Dr. Ecad for a formal introduction of our distinguished speaker today.
Thank you, Hakan. I want to tell you one interesting story. Like, I have known of Dr. Cotta's research many, many years, being a heat transfer person myself. And I was in a meeting in London in September, I think. And somebody from Brazil said, you're from NC State, do you know Dr. Cotta? I said, what is the connection? He said, well, he was Dr. Ozisik's student, and I didn't know that. So I think I came back the week after that, and I sent an email to Hakan, and I said, do you know him? He said, yeah, of course I know him. And then I said, okay, I'm going to contact him. And we said, okay, let's do it. So then everything happened, the rest is history. And he responded almost within less than a day, and he had written a long email about why it is such a great honor for him. That was also an emotional connection that he had with Dr. Ozisik. So it was wonderful to see the email that he wrote, and I think that shows a lot about his care for his experience here at NC State with Professor Ozisik, of course, primarily. But that's the best part of bringing somebody like Dr. Cotta back, is that not only did they do their education here, but they also went out and did a lot of good in the world. So I mean, you can just look at his career and say, wow, he's done a lot. And that's the reason why I think he's the perfect candidate for this. In terms of what he's done, I think there's very much to say. I mean, you can see the entire description of his career here. But I can tell you that as a heat transfer person, some of these awards that he's gotten are very competitive. A lot of well-known people who have received this award, including Dr. Cotta. But these are awards that not just in Brazil or United States, across the world, Europe, Asia. You can talk about it. His impact is across the world. So that's something that's very rare, and you will not see many academics have this kind of impact. So I'm not going to read all this, but you can see that his impact is huge in the field of heat transfer. So more importantly, he also tied to his roots. He continued to do a lot of the research based on all his PhD work, that he built up the knowledge, and then he went into areas of research which are very diverse, solving problems across the board. So I think he's going to share all that with us today. So I welcome Dr. Renato Cotta to come and give us our distinguished lecture. Absolutely.
Yes. I can turn around.
You can move forward, back in like this.
And
this
laser.
is your laser pointer,
Okay.
and you can turn there.
All right. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, good morning. First of all, I have to say a big thank you to Hakan and Renato for giving me this opportunity of coming back here, first of all, because this was a place, should I speak louder? Okay. This is a place that brings me wonderful memories. And this is the place that gave me the basis for all of my career that came afterwards. And this is the place where I met the most important person in my professional life, who was Professor Necati Ozisik. And the good opportunity to see such good friends like Hakan, Mary Claire, my classmates at that time, Professor Johnson, also great to see you here. And of course, to have the chance of bringing my wife, also a professor in my department, in my lab, my boss, at home and at work, and my son, Victor, who is a junior at UMBC. Don't be mad at me. I can explain the story later on, but he's a junior of mechanical engineering at UMBC, but that might change in the future. And so I'm really glad to be here. It's a very emotional moment for me. Last night when I arrived, I already cried a bit. If I cry again today, don't worry, I'm okay. I'm crying for the good emotion, okay? So what I planned for today, I planned to have this opportunity of paying a tribute to this very important scientist called Necati Ozisik. He's a landmark of in NC State. You can be sure about that. Many people still refer to NC State mechanical engineering and remember Necati Ozisik, not only because of himself, but by what he left behind, his books and his students that spread out his knowledge. So I'll try to show a little bit with a couple of pictures that I could gather here and there. When I was here, I was in my first marriage. So after a divorce, which is equivalent to a tsunami and an earthquake in terms of destructive power, I lost most of the pictures. So I don't have any photos myself. I had to borrow photos from friends. So I couldn't collect the best photos, but I'll try to show you. Right now, I have a double appointment at the Mechanical Engineering Department of the Federal University of Rio. I invite you to come meet us. Mary Claire had the chance to visit us back in 1990. Professor Oisic himself came in 1988. And I'm now the senior consultant for the General Director of Nuclear and Technological Development of the Brazilian Navy. Okay, so I'll give you a background, a quick background about Professor Oisic. Then I'll tell you about this computational-analytical modeling approach that I worked throughout my life with his collaboration. I'll talk a little bit about some applications and recent progress, not to be very boring, and then I'll give some final comments. I hope to do everything in about 40 minutes at most. Well, Professor Necati Ozisik left us in 2008. The last time I met him was in 2004, back in Turkey. He got his PhD from the University of London back in 1950, and became, after going back to Turkey for a few years, he came into the US working for the ASHRAE lab, and then to Oak Ridge National Lab. Not many people know about that. He was in the nuclear field too. Since I came from a nuclear engineering background, that's something that always interested me about his knowledge, that he had this perception of the nuclear field. But not many people know that his thesis was fully experimental. Everyone thinks Necati was a purely theoretical person, but he had this experimental background, and that made him more sensible, especially for validation of experimental and theoretical work. So he was always worried about having some comparisons of experiments and theory. So this is a very famous picture from his thesis that is in different books. At that time was actually the first good picture of dropwise condensation. So he told me the whole story, how many weeks he spent to get that picture right. Sometimes the droplets would form and they would just slide down, so he couldn't get a good picture, and this was one of the best ones he could get. So this was published back in 1953, and still now it's valuable information. Okay, but here's why he's even better known, because of the books. He was an excellent writer. He was very didactical. He could write in the way that anyone without taking his course would be able to read. Sometimes in class he would open his books and he would read. He would teach you read, and people say, well, why is he reading? I said, because there is no better way of saying than this one that he wrote. Why is he going to get worse than it's in the book? He was an excellent writer. And I tried to copy him. I still do. But it's very difficult because he had a very, very organized mind. And he had an extremely organized office. He could trace any paper from any year. He had little boxes for every different subject. He had the largest amount of files that I've seen someone having. He had. And he would come from one to the other. He was a short man, very fast man. He used to walk there. He would come back and get another paper, give to you. Normally, you go consult him. You come back with 3, 4 papers to read. So if you don't want to get 3, 4 more papers, don't go there. But in fact, he was very active, and he could recall all the information, wherever it was from those files. When I came back to Brazil, I even bought the same brands of boxes and files, and I tried to get myself organized like him. It lasted for a year. at most. Then I got totally lost in my organization because organization needs work. You have to work hard to keep yourself organized every day. So if you let the mess of one day accumulate with the mess for the next day, it's gone. So he taught me that. I didn't learn, but he taught me. So about his books. So he started with the heat exchanger book, the heat exchanger design book with Arthur Fraz back in ASHRAE. But for me, this was the very first interesting book, Boundary Value Problems of Heat Conduction. He was still in Oak Ridge, coming out from Oak Ridge, joining NC State when he started writing this one. But this is a hidden gem, radiative transfer from 1973. I never understood why he didn't have a second version of that one, because no other book, there is no other book available that has the same treatment, this complete treatment of non-participating and participating media radiative transfer. This is a hidden gem. It's a pity he didn't have the time to come up with a second edition. Then came his basic heat transfer book, which was more like a preparation for this one. That's very popular. This was a little bit more summarized. This was the right size for the teaching of one semester, but this was very, very, very complete. I think the book he came up with, Yildiz Bayazitoglu, later on, resembles most this one. So it's more like a second edition of this one. But this one is much more complete and it's very popular. Until now in Rio is our textbook for heat transfer. It also deserves a second edition. Then perhaps the most famous book he has, Heat Conduction, 1980, that I used a lot, we all used a lot. And for me, a very special book, which is the Unified Analysis and Solutions of Heat and Mass Diffusion by Mihailov and Oisic. By the time I was here, I took my PhD from 82 to 85. 82, I was 100% nuclear. So after I finished the first 2 semesters in nuclear engineering, I switched majors. I came to mechanical engineering so that I could work with Professor Oisic. So when I came here, I repeated all of the courses for mechanical engineering. But I was very happy because he gave me a TA to revise all of this book. So I was even paid for that. Look at this. I was so happy to be able to rederive all the equations of the book he was writing, and he even gave me some money for that. So I was very happy doing that every day, trying to find out typos, try to find out mistakes in the equations so that it could be, and I finally learned that. And I cannot forget now. I see this is in my mind because you work like crazy 1 year trying to find mistakes of a book. This enters your soul. So after that, we have the heat transfer solver. Another is more like a software that he prepared with Professor Mihailov. The second edition of his heat conduction book, his finite difference book, the inverse heat transfer with Elcio Orlandi from Brazil, and then the second editions of the finite difference method that I had the honor to participate in, the second edition of the elements of heat transfer, and the second edition of the inverse heat transfer problem. So you see, this is a collection of books that covers all of the heat transfer field. I have all of them, and certainly every library in the world that has mechanical engineering should have. So who was with me at that time? Well, first of all, Professor Oisic spanned different areas: analytical heat conduction theory, of course, radiation in the participating media, inverse problem, hyperbolic heat conduction, phase change problems, drying in capillary porous media, finite difference in heat and fluid flow, and the list keeps going. But who was with me by then? Well, besides Professor Mihailov, that I had the honor to meet him, he spent 2 periods of 4 months in 1983 and in 1984. Professor Yama Yenner, a close collaborator of Professor Ozisik, passed away, unfortunately. Professor Yildiz Bayazitoglu from Rice University, is still active. This guy was the very first Brazilian. Many people think I was the first Brazilian working with Professor Ozisik, but in fact, before me, he was a part-time student of Professor Ozisik, Professor Bogado Leite, Sergio Leite. He was a nuclear engineering student, and he induced me to come here. He's a close friend of mine, and he finished by 1980, and I came by the end of 1981, early 1982, in fact. So we were like 1 year difference between the two of us, but Oisic was his co-advisor. And they did some very nice work on moving boundary problems. Yunus Sengel, that's our, in the Hall of Fame as well, very well known for the textbooks. He was my veteran. David Glass from NASA. Stefan Tynell from Penn State, the radiative heat transfer guy. Mary Claire Robbins, drying in porous media. Then went to the University of Texas in San Antonio for some time. Then Woo Seung Kim, who is now rector of Hanyang University. So you see, integral transforms can make rectors. So this is good news. Kim came after me, just 1 year after me. Look, Hakan Ozisik here. He was in the group. He was a master student of Dr. Michael Bowles. Nísio Brum, who was a Brazilian that came for the split sandwich program, split PhD. He came 1 year after me, shared the room with me and Mary Claire. And Paulo Lobo, he was a military from the Brazilian army. He came for the PhD. Unfortunately, Paulo passed away a few years ago. Then came the generation just afterwards, Elcio Orlandi, here in the picture with Necati, myself, and Elcio. We were here in the heat transfer conference in Gyeongju, Korea. Dr. Antonio Neto, who also came together with Elcio and Rodrigo Guedes, three PhD students of Necati from Brazil that worked here in the same period. Here you can see myself and Tony when I visited here in 1981. Oh, that's my NC State shirt. That's now gone. Yeah, it's now gone. It won't fit me anymore. So, and this is one of my postdoc students that came to spend a postdoc with Necati, João Aparecido. He spent 1 year with Necati just before Necati retired. So this is the team, the Brazilian team, the collaboration that we kept going also during that period. Let me show you some pictures of that time. That's our campus, quite different. This is a postcard that I had. This was the first letter that I sent back home. This picture in 1982 was a picture of the whole campus. You see the parking lot here was the football field. Broughton Hall, my office was just here to the left, just below, just on top of Necati's office. It was myself, Mary Claire, and a few people changed, but all of the time, myself and Mary Claire. This is my old Impala, nine seats. I got this Impala here for $750. When I changed the tires, it was more than that. So when I sold the cars, I sold for the price of the tires. I saw the guy that bought my car. But every people that need to move, I was U-Haul. They would call me. Oh, can you come help us move? Yes, of course. I would think, I'm the driver. I don't carry anything. I am just the driver. So, and I was here, 1983, for the NCAA championship. I was there in the fire of the library, but I didn't place any fire. I just watched it. I was there when Jim Valvano was brilliant, and we won the championship. I know that we are in good spot now, right now, yeah, top 4. So both boys and girls. So this is Necati, and our dear Sigil was Hakan's mother. A great lady, by the way, a great lady. It was a wonderful education. extremely careful. And she came to the birthday of my daughter, for the 1 year birthday of my daughter, both of them. And a few years later, she would come to Rio to visit us as well. Okay, so now that I make these remembrances, maybe it took too long. Yeah, Carolina told me, oh, you're gonna talk about the past, you're gonna talk too much. So try to be fast on the rest. Okay, so what we do, from what Necati taught us, we tried to combine his knowledge, the knowledge that he gave on analytical problem solving, with the advances in numerical analysis. So I was from the generation that had the first personal computers. I used to have a Commodore 64 kilobytes on my desk at home. I used to connect to the IBM computer in the Research Triangle Center, in the data center of the university, and I could work with my Budweiser on my side. I could work remotely from home with 40 columns. There is no full screen, just one 300 BPS, sometimes 600 BPS at the most. That's what we could get. But it was fun. And so we had to mix numerical and analytical somehow. Otherwise, analytical would be smashed by numerical, because finite difference, finite elements, boundary elements, they were all growing and growing and growing, and people were already talking about commercial software. So what was the way out? Find the advantages of having a hybrid computational analytical modeling. So we work both on the physical modeling and on the mathematical modeling. When we try also to do, in the formulation, we try to do some hybrid concept of mixing distributed and lumped formulation. So even before we talk about direct problem solution, we already work on the formulation. For the direct problem solution, as I mentioned to you, I have devoted most of my time to work on developing hybrid methods based on integral transforms. So integral transform give the basic, you go analytical up to the point you can, then from that point you become numerical. You join with your numerical knowledge. And use that also for inverse problem and optimization and other very CPU intensive tasks, because you can save a lot of time. The most intensive is the problem. The more time you save, you can demonstrate the savings of this hybrid approach. Of course, in the algorithmic implementation, what helped us very much was the advent of symbolic computation. So symbolic computation came to make our lives much easier. I remember that typically one of our students would take 4 or 5 months only to derive the equations. That was a lot, because it was a lot of handwork. But after packages sub maxima and Mathematica especially, that we like very much, Maple and so on, we were able to do those steps all automatically, and that life became much easier. And of course, connect that with experimental analysis. We never got away from experimental analysis. We just try to make our experiments as simple as possible and take advantage of what we had in terms of theoretical treatment. Okay, so briefly, one of the topics that I used a lot from what I learned from him was this coupled integral equation approach for solving different problems. But this was his first paper. He used it for solving melting or solidification, working with a guy at the ETH Zurich, Joseph Manick, and they came up with an idea of using Helmholtz integration to rewrite problem formulations in a lumped form, but carrying more information in the lumping procedure, in the averaging procedure, and also providing a way of extending the accuracy of this approximation, but considering higher orders of Helmholtz integration. So that was a great idea that I pursued, that I extended over the years. But I was based in this very first paper. I was there just by his side when he came up with this very first idea and published in 1985. So just to give you an example, a few years later, I re-derived the classical Finn equation. The classical Finn equation, we all know it looks like this, but with this Hermite treatment, it has the same final form, but with a different coefficient. This different coefficient allows you to gain a lot of accuracy. For example, you can use the Finn equation, which in our minds, we know that the Finn equation is no good if BO is greater than 0.1. But you can see here, you can still use it for larger BO, even BO10, you see. Here, the graph is a kind of pale, but you can see these two curves here. These two curves are the exact to this solution, and this improved solution. And this is the failed classical approach. So you can preserve accuracy of this lumping differential analysis, avoiding making the simple approximation of negligible gradient, but simply writing the average potential as a function, as a derivable function of the surface potential. So this is the simplest example possible, the classical Finn equation, but you can imagine we have applied that to different classes of problems, many different classes of problems. Well, then comes integral transforms. Necati is worldwide known for his work on integral transforms. It all started back, if you can say, in Fourier works itself, when he devised the separation of variables as a byproduct to solve the heat transfer equation. What did they do? Oh, I cannot go here. So to come up with the heat transfer equation, he had to solve it to convince the people, compare with experimental results. So he proposed this separation of variables approach. This was the base of everything. There is a guy called Koshelyakov from Leningrad that he came up with this generalized, this classical integral transform method. It's the first time because Fourier could not solve non-homogeneous problems. Everyone is linear so far, but Koshelyakov managed to solve non-homogeneous problem. It is the very first formal proposition of the integral transform method, okay? He was in parallel, in the same place working. There is another guy working, Galerkin, that we all know very well. And they were developing things that have an intersection. They do have an intersection. Then comes Lykov, and a little bit afterwards, Oisic. And there is another guy, Ocher, also originally from Turkey, but especially this book by Oisic provides the first view of a generalized integral transform technique. When you don't have to talk about Fourier transforms, Hankel transforms, and such transform, you don't have to give names to those eigenfunctions, or you can just call it integral transforms and just put everything into an eigenvalue problem that does not have to be named after anyone, okay? So Lykov, again, kept working. Oisic kept working, and this is a very special book, as I mentioned before. Sadek Kakachi and Yama Enner also came up with a heat conduction book. Now, Carolina is co-author of the latest, she was invited by Sadek Kakachi. She is co-author of the latest edition of the heat conduction book by Sadek Kakachi. And this book is especially brilliant, Unified Analysis and Solutions of Heat and Mass Diffusion. 7 different classes of problems unified in 7 different general solutions. So they did a great work with these unified analysis and solutions of heat and mass diffusion. Okay, then comes the generalized integral transform technique. Another guy from NC State that we should praise, Raymond Murray. Raymond Murray was in the team of Oppenheimer. I have an interesting story I can tell you later. I don't have time. Carolina is already looking at me, so I know I have to hurry. But Raymond Murray brought to Necati this very interesting problem of a nuclear fuel element with a transient heat transfer coefficient, the H as a function of time. And that was not solvable in exact form. So Necati proposed to use, proposed to use an approximate analytical solution. Okay, it's not transformable, but let's get the first row of this system, and it is going to give us some information. They did not make any computation. They only proposed that as a technical note. 1974. In 1975, Mikhailov independently proposed the same thing, but not for a transient boundary condition, but for a transient equation coefficient. Coefficient in the diffusion equation that was variable with time. Also not solvable exactly at that time. And the two works introduced this terminology, generalized integral transform technique. Not explicitly, but they kind of tried to show this was a generalization of the classical concept. Then Yildiz Bayazitoglu and Sergio Bogado Leite, the two of them, Yildiz solved the Gratz type problem. Sergio solved a moving boundary problem, as I mentioned to you. There is another guy, Guiccieri. Guiccieri was also a master student of Oisic. Then he went to the aerospace industry. He worked in California many years. And Guiccieri also did some work. I forgot to include him here. Then in my thesis, what I tried to do, as I mentioned before, is to grab these ideas and put it into a computational structure. To, instead of providing an approximate solution, let's go to the full solution of the system. Let's solve the whole coupled system, and let's propose a solution of that. Later on, this became, we also tackled nonlinear problems. And I also revisited the moving boundary problems through this approach. So that's how it started. It started because I was a computational guy. Besides this genius here, Mikhailov, Oisic, and Murray, so I was there just by their side, and I could benefit from their knowledge. Okay, so what are the basic steps in this generalized integral transform technique? Now, instead of having to find the eigenvalue problem, you can choose. You can choose the eigenvalue problem that gives enough information of your problem. So you have a degree of freedom here in this choice. That's good for a method. If you have the degrees of choice, that's very interesting. Then you develop the integral transform pair. Of course, if you don't know how to develop the integral transform pair, go back and make a different choice of eigenvalue problem. Then you can integral transform your partial differential equation. You can finally numerically or analytically solve the resulting ODE system. So your numerical task is always the solution of an ODE system. That's the most difficult numerical task that you have. At that time, 74 and 75, that was a really difficult task because these systems tend to be stiff. But 77, 79, there were methods, there were schemes to solve ODE, stiff ODEs that were good enough for all of those problems. Okay, and then you finally recall the analytical inversion formula. Advantages, the numerical task is always in one single independent variable. It's a reasonably simple computational implementation because for this numerical task, you have very good libraries, both public domain or in subroutine packages. You can handle irregular domain just like you handle regular domains. It's just a question of solving the eigenvalue problem in that irregular domain. If you look at the unified analysis book of the 1984 book, you see that all of the derivations are in volume V in surface S. So in principle, anything fits in there. You can control the global error automatically because you control the local error of the ordinary differential equations, and you control the eigenfunction expansion truncation order. And you have, that's the most interesting, a mild increase in computational costs if you increase the number of space variables. So you don't have that same behavior of the discrete approaches that you, the order of computational costs is or handles when you go from 1D to 2D to 3D. Here you have an increase in 20% or so when you go to 1 to 2 or to 2 to 3. Okay? So along the years, we applied that to diffusion, convection diffusion, reaction convection diffusion, again, various problems, boundary layer equations, Navier-Stokes equations, a lot of work done in different years. And the computer-intensive task where it shows up more clearly everything that you have to do the direct problem many times. Optimization, inverse problem analysis. Sometimes you have to solve the problem 100,000 times in MC structure, for example. Multi-scale problem, simulation under uncertainty, coupled multiphysics problems, physics-informed neural networks. So everything that you need to do, lots of computation of one single partial differential equation, makes it much easier, makes your life much easier. So, as I told you, I tried to imitate him writing, so I started writing like crazy too. This was my first book back in 1993, when I talk about integral transform, this computational structure. This one I tried to invite him to join me, but he was extremely involved in the second edition of the conduction and on the finite difference book. And that problem, he was totally passionate for finite difference. So it was, when I talked to him about integral transforms, he would take me back to finite difference. I was also working on finite difference, but he was more than that. He was immersion. It was an immersion because he was finishing the book, and he was very dense. When he worked on something, he was very dense. So I could not have him join me. Then came the heat conduction with Mihailov. Mihailov, on the other way, he accepted my invitation to come to Brazil. He spent 20 years with us in Brazil. Unfortunately, he passed away one month ago. Then there was this second book in 1998, the journal, another book on numerical analysis 2000, then one specific for convective heat transfer. Then we got invited to the handbook of numerical heat transfer. That was very important. That was to be recognized by the by the CFD community, that we would have a spot on the handbook was a very good feeling for me. Then other books that are more recent, and now they already deal with some of the applications in micro nanoscale, and specifically one that I like very much, the opportunity of working on the second version, the second edition of the finite difference methods, where we have included integral transforms as the last chapter. That was very nice, because that was a tribute for him, because we had the chance of including this as part of his work. And of course, him as the first author always, then Elcio, then Marcelo Colasso, then myself. And the most recent handbook of thermoscience engineering, which starts, that was together with Frank Kulaki, headed by Frank Kulaki, but Frank gave me the chance to write the first two chapters and put there, right there, both the information on the formulation of heat transfer problems and on the analytical solution of heat transfer problems. Well, now I guess I have to jump. How much time I have, Carolina? I will jump something, okay? Because if I don't jump something, we are going to be in trouble. So let me jump a little bit. I want to show you one application. One application of our recent work. I will leave the presentation here, of course, if you are curious later on. But I need to show you some of the results so that you can believe me. But I'll talk a little bit about ice accretion in aeronautical sensors and structure. I remember since I was here, aerospace, aeronautical was a very strong topic here, was always a very strong topic here. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. But these are the other projects that we are presently involved, myself and Carolina, which includes waste heat recovery by microheat exchangers, especially from high concentration photovoltaics panels. Desalination, we have been doing a lot of desalination by membrane distillation, both direct contact and air gap with vacuum. This is sponsored by the Portuguese petroleum company, Galp. Also, the Rio is very famous for the petroleum industry. So the big bucks, we sponsor our fundamental work using the money from the petroleum companies. So we have Total, the French company, and Qatar Energy from Qatar is sponsoring one project of waste heat recovery from turbines and for treatment of production water. So this is about $5 million project, this one, and this is about 3 million. So these are very long-term, big projects, headed by Carolina, in fact. So I'm part of her team. Transient flow in heterogeneous petroleum reservoirs and core flood experiments. There I have another colleague. In fact, there is a competition. Shell is sponsoring Carolina, Petrobras is sponsoring myself, so I cannot talk at home about this subject with her. But those are the core flood experiments to inspect the reservoir rocks. Microreactors for continuous biodiesel synthesis, and piezoelectrical and thermal metamaterials. That's the work with the Navy that we are doing together with the Office of the American Office of Naval Research sponsorship, okay? So let me talk about just one application, which is very important for me, and it has to do with this moment. I told Hakan, and even I thought he knew about that. I'm sure Mary Claire knows about that. But when I was here, I had a daughter. I was married, very young and married, and we had our daughter. And unfortunately, both of them passed away. My daughter passed away in a very tragic accident of the Air France 447 flight that was going from Rio to Paris in 2009. She was going from her wedding, beautiful princess wedding. They were going to their honeymoon in Florence, to Toscana, following my suggestion. And, you know, everyone died in that flight, in that tragedy. And her mother died 1 year afterwards, or 1.5 years, of full depression. We were not married anymore. I was already married to Carolina. I had Victor. And I was saved because of that, because when you lose people in a tragic accident like that, many more people die. You can multiply easily by 4 or 5. That's the real counting of the fatalities. I was saved by the love of Carolina and Victor. And the triggering process in that flight, what was happening? People more and more were flying in higher altitudes to save fuel. We know that the drive is always economical. The real drive is always economical in industry. Of course, safety pays its role, but when it deals with economics, and life is also economy. Losses of life also touch very heavily economics. But in everyday life, people try to save fuel, and they would fly in higher altitudes. The problem is that those that are familiar with the aeronautical industry, it takes a long time for you to certify a certain component of an airplane. So if you are flying today with a computer, it's not the latest chip that's there. It's an older chip, much older chip that was certified, and it's going to be working there for many, many years. The pitot tube is not different. The pitot tube, it takes at most 10 years for you to fully certify, or between 5 and 10, depending on the country. But besides, there is an envelope, there is an allowable envelope of altitude and temperatures that you can fly with a certain equipment. Outside that envelope, you are not certified, so you are not supposed to fly. Or the envelope has to be much more restrictable. The European envelope at that time was very, very mild. The British envelope was much tougher, the American too. It would demand pitot tubes that were much stiffer. The Goodrich pitot tube was an excellent one for such kind of flights, for such kind of airplanes. But the French industry substituted the pitot tube by a Thales pitot tube that would work good enough for the European envelope, but would never pass the British envelope. So a discussion started between Airbus, Air France, the agents, the European agents, the name, now I cannot remember, the European Aviation Agency. They started paperwork for 2 years because there were 11 reports from Air France pilots saying that the Thales pitot tubes were freezing, were forming ice in high altitudes, and they were getting funny behavior of the automatic control of the airplane, and they were returning this control to the pilots in the middle of a cloud formation. So this paperwork took 2 years, and after 2 years, there was a recommendation of the agency. At least one of the three pitot tubes of the Airbus should be Goodrich. And the company should find the best moment to do that. Of course, if you recommend and you can choose the best moment, no one changed anything. They kept flying with the 3 Thales pitot that would form ice in such high altitudes. But you may say, but is that enough for a plane to crash? No, it's always the Swiss cheese behavior. You have to find the path for a tragedy through the holes. But if the first one, if you have a first hole, you have a beginning. So that's the trigger. So the freezing of the pitot tube tips was sufficient to lead to a tragedy that took 4 minutes. We are talking 10 here. We are talking 10 minutes. In 4 minutes, the pilots had to understand what was going on. Why was this crazy automatic pilot returned the control to them? But that's another story I'll tell you later on. But most important, I decided that was the way that I was kept useful. For 4 months, I could not work, of course. For 4 months, I was at home. Carolina was doing all my work so that I didn't lose the job. And finally, after 4 months, the friends, Elcio, Attila, other friends, convinced me to go back to work and study that problem. So that's how I went into pitot tubes, into ice accretion in general. So that's the picture you have. Of course, I started by modeling with some experimental results from other people. Then I had to build my own icing wind tunnel. Otherwise, I wouldn't have good measurements. And we kept working. And in 2015, I was very happy that we got the Harton-Irvine Award as the best paper of the year. It was a collection of everything we did up to that point. Can I see the movie here? Let's see if I can. Jack, can you help me? Is Jack there? Maybe I can do here, yeah? Oh, yeah, I can do it here. So we built this icing wind tunnel that you can see right there. The very first in the South Hemisphere. It takes us to Mach 0.3 and to temperatures -20. If you use a smaller velocity, then you can get to higher. If you get a higher temperature, you can go to a higher Mach, and you can play a little bit with the temperature and the Mach number. So this is the icing phenomena. That's the ice accretion that happens at the tip of the pitot tube. You see that you don't have much icing along the body. The resistance, the electrical resistance, is right here over the length of this tube. But at the tip, you do have some icing. So these conditions were much milder than the ones that they have faced up there. We also, I borrowed a jet from the Navy, a Skyhawk, And they were very nice to me. They gave me as many hours, as long as I use the training of the pilots. I can use as many hours of flying as I would like to. So we did install a fully instrumented pitot tube in those flights. Of course, I would not ask the young pilots to go through cumulus nimbus. I wouldn't dare asking that. But I asked them, turn on and turn off the, I just want to study the recovery, the thermal recovery of the pitot tube in actual flight conditions. And that was very helpful, you see here. So these are the kind of model we came up. We use integral transformers together with some improved lumping, so we could simulate this whole strange body of the pitot tube with all the internals, including the ceramics inside that acts as an electrical insulator. Outside, it was enough to use boundary layer turbulent flow, and also solved by integral transforms. So this is the kind of behavior that you see for the temperature along the pitot tube. You can see that the tip gets at a certain point, the tips get below 0 degree. Here's the experimental measurements in red and the theory in black. Only at the handle, we don't care much. We didn't get the right boundary condition here at the handle. There was not a big influence inside the pitot tube. So we just made an insulation, I cannot remember now, but an insulation or imperfect contact boundary condition. So we kept working on that. Now we work on the avoiding the isoccretion, okay? Avoiding the isoccretion by using super hydrophobic surface. So this is one interesting plant we have in our ranch. We have in our farm. You can see the droplet bumping around, and it's an omniphobic surface. That's how the leaf is always clean, because those droplets can carry along the dust. And then we started treating our surface to have super hydrophobic droplets with around 140 degrees of contact angle. And we went into the simulation of a single droplet, either suspended or sitting on a surface, to be able to get the right modeling with the 4 phases: supercooling, recalescence, solidification, and cooling, the 4 stages that you want to reproduce for the droplet temperature. They are right there. This is just a scheme, but you're going to see that result theoretically. We borrowed experimental results. These are experiments we didn't perform, but we borrowed from this work by Hindmarsh. That's a movie too, but I think it's not working, this one. You can see, oh no, it is working. You can see recalescence happening there. Then you can see the actual freezing going on of the droplets sitting on the surface. So based on those experimental results, we could make the simulation. You can see here, this is theory in black and experiment in red. So it's a very good agreement. And you can see that there should be a movie here too, I hope. You can see the way the droplet goes through recalescence, then the freezing itself, and the cooling, the final cooling. So that's the whole process. We could get a very accurate simulation. Okay, so sorry for avoiding some slides, but as my wife said that would happen, and she's always right, I took too much time in the beginning because it's an emotional moment. So forgive me if it was, I didn't show all of the technical content, but I will be glad to come here many, many times. I'm offering myself to come many, many times. So, and hopefully even for a longer period. So let me thank again Professor Oisic for all his guidance. So it was not only me, but he formed generations of thermal scientists. And Hakan is doing a great job now of collecting the name of those peoples. We can easily build the tree of Necati Ozisik because many of these people formed other people, and we would have a beautiful scientific tree for him. I'm not surprised to see many people that are contributing to thermal science nowadays. So I want to ask Hakan, I want to thank Hakan for his friendship since 1982. And Mary Claire as well. And I'm very glad to see she's here. I found out that in the department. I was looking for your name, and where is Mary Claire now? Then I found NC State. Oh, so she's back there. I knew that you came back from San Antonio, but I wasn't sure that you would be here. But I'm very glad to see you here. Our department head, Professor Eckert, for the very kind invitation in the arrangements. Of course, my boss, Fleet Admiral Rabelo, for allowing me to come here and supporting all of the research we do, the collaborators, the sponsors, and most especially to our students, collaborators, and sponsors. And I dedicate this presentation to my daughter, of course, and my father. This the last picture of the two of them together that I have in her wedding. I have one last picture that I took with her later on that night. And my family now, Carolina, my wife, Victor, my oldest, who is here, Clara, 14, Gabriel, 12. So these two stayed back home because it's class time. So they are sons of two professors, so no easy time. And my family as a whole, my mother, my brother and sister, that were fundamental that we could cross this big storm. Whew. So my daughter wasn't born here because I couldn't pay for the health insurance. So my wife had to fly back to Brazil when she was 6 months pregnant, and I could not go see her because I was a TA, I was teaching. It was in the middle of the semester, so I only met my daughter after she was 1 month old. And that time there was no internet. So the young guys here, we used to send a letter, it would take from 7 to 10 days. So I saw the first picture of my daughter. She was already 10 days old. And a telephone call only Sunday midnight because it was like $1 a minute. And that time, $1 was a lot. You see, dollar store was a very expensive store. So it's very tough. It's very tough. You see, you really need to believe in what you're doing to cross all of that emotion. But I'm glad that you gave me the chance to come back with my new family. I'll be grateful for the rest of my life. Thank you very much. Sorry.
All right, we have some time for questions. Anybody has questions? I know that Dr. Cotta spent a lot of time talking about the influence of Dr. Ozisik on his career, but I'm pretty sure if we give him a chance, he can talk to us for 10 hours on all his projects that he's been working on, his incredible number of papers. Get to Google Scholar. I'm telling you, there's a lot of fantastic papers out there. And he's taken this science behind all the stuff that Dr. Ozisik done, and he's actually applied it to a lot of problems across the ground. He showed a few examples there, but there are a lot more. So if you have any questions, I think you should ask him about some of his problems that he's worked on. I'm pretty sure he'll be glad to talk about that. So if you have, I think we can spend about 5 to 10 minutes if you have any questions.
Thank you very much for the excellent talk. I have one quick question about the icing. I think you showed that the icing forms on the tip right? But not into the tube. Can you briefly explain? I didn't totally catch that. So why is it only
Yeah.
from the tip?
The icing occurs mostly in the tip, of course, and on the handle. Those that are normal to the flow, more or less normal to the flow. Of course, you may have a small angle of attack, so this would be slightly different. But there we consider the worst case scenario that you have a normal flow, stagnation flow both on the tip and on the handle. On the surface, and this two-phase flow with the droplets, with the supercooled droplets and the air, it doesn't attach much. And you see that in all of the experiments, you don't have much of attachment of there's not enough time for you to exchange heat and to make it adhere to the surface. And besides, you have more, how do you say, shear. So it's going to be harder for this attachment to happen. That's why you don't see much icing of the surface parallel to the flow.
Thank you.
It happens the same in the wings. The literature on wings, ice accretion in wings, is very rich because that makes an economical impact. Because you change aerodynamics completely, you make your flight envelope totally different, so you consume much more fuel and weight, of course, and you have more weight. But at the as you get away from the border of the attack, you won't find that much ice. Especially, I had a picture in the beginning. You see lots of icing close to the border of attack.
Regarding the multi-phase problem with the icing, when you were doing the modeling, was there a specialized equation of state that you use for that model? Because I don't know anything regarding from like gas to solid phase. I do know from gas to liquid, which that multi-phase with Ping Robinson, but I have no like, I guess, sense of like how that a state model you would use for this. So I guess some highlighting would be interesting.
Well, there are the two scales. One is the scale of the droplet, where you use, if you have water, there are pure substance, you use a Stefan type equation to solve for the phase change problem in the droplet, either one-dimensional, two-dimensional, or three-dimensional, depending if it's suspended or if it's touching a surface. And if it's touching an irregular surface, then it can be 3D. When you simulate the whole pitot, these scales are two different. So you don't deal with one droplet. You deal with a layer of droplets forming like those, this population of droplets impacting and going through recalescence immediately after they touch the surface. From that point on, it's an Stefan type problem. You see, on the tip of the pitot tube.
So my question is a little more philosophical in the sense that we did all the analytical solutions that Dr. Ozisik created, and then we moved on to finite difference to discretize it. Of course, we lose some accuracy because we are discretizing it. Now you go to models and computational tools that are available. How do you bridge the gap in knowledge from real analytical solutions to optimized solutions, which are not perfect, but are giving us answers? How do you, from your perspective of doing both analytical and here, how do you say which answer is right? Because a lot of the kids currently are using tools. They're not using the science behind what you did.
Great question, because that could be 10 hours talking. That's a question for 10 hours talking. Yeah, you see, there is a first, can I go back just a few slides here? There is something that I jumped that it's an interesting slide for that purpose. Okay, this one I jumped. I was showing an example of a work for a regular domain, but I was also talking about total and partial transformation. This was a work, our first work in that direction was in 1994, exactly when Professor Oisic was publishing the finite difference book. At that moment, if you look back, you look back at the development of simulation in engineering, and this not only for heat transfer, this analysis is valid for all of the fields. Up to the 50s, after the computer boom, we rely on analytical methods. We rely on sometimes approximate formulations, boundary layer, or other approximations to solve problems that were unsolvable for us at that time. We couldn't imagine solving, although Richardson introduced finite difference way before, we could not dream about solving millions of algebraic equations altogether. So before the computer boom, we had to do analytical. If you go to the NASA, reports, they are beautiful. There's a lot of information there, lots of forgotten information. I love to go to the library to see old books, because in the old books are many ideas that were abandoned because of the computer boom. The computer boom was very important for us. The computer boom allowed us to dream about progress that we have now that would be impossible, or it would take 100 years if we had to do only experiments. Experiments are I would say, the closest to the truth that you can get. Of course, it has its uncertainties. Of course, it has its mistakes and difficulties, but you are trying to imitate reality in a different scale or in a different environment, in a controlled environment. But simulation allowed us to go faster. In the beginning, we had to deal with simple problems, even with numerical methods being developed. So analytical approaches still survived for quite some time. So 50s and 60s, at that time, Necati was writing his boundary value problems. Finite differences were getting popular, but they were not that powerful because computers were not that powerful. So up to the 70s, analytical work was still very important. So you see all this generation, Oisic, Leykov, Mihailov, all of these people that were very good at the analytical work, and many others that you can name in different fields, they were unbeatable up to the 70s. But then the early 80s started, the computers, people started talking about supercomputers and so on. So things changed. Then most of the students would go into the numerical method. No student, in my class even, most of the people went into the numerical methods. And Necati, he looked back and said, oh, I did a lot of analytical work. So let me do some numerical work and let me try to take advantage of my knowledge on analytical work. And his writing, again, was wonderful. So his finite difference book is very didactical. Most numerical books, they only show the equation, they jump to a final scheme. He was very careful, deriving everything very, very carefully. And then I brought to his attention this work that I did with these ex-students of mine, Jerk. And the idea, in fact, you should pronounce Gurk. Yeah. And the idea here was to mix integral transforms and finite difference. So instead of fully transform, you have a 3D problem. You can do a 3D integral transform, that's more analytical work, and you end up with a system of ODEs to solve numerically. But suppose you have a very good 2D finite elements code, and that happened many times, you have a very good 2D finite elements code that you like very much. You don't want to give it up. No problem. Get the 3D problem, eliminate one direction by integral transforms, then you are left with a system of 2D problems just the way your software handles. Or suppose you have a 1D PDE solver that you love it, that has an automatic accuracy control, that you trust very much. No problem. You get this 3D or these 2D problems and eliminate 2 or 1 coordinates and solve the resulting system of partial differential equation. So this is the mingling of integral transforms and numerical methods. We did it with finite elements, with finite difference, different colleagues. So I had a colleague that he was a finite element guy, very good guy. I told him, let's give it a try. Let's see which one is from Swansea. Which one is more expensive, integral transforms in one direction and your 2D code or your 3D code? The 2D code with one integral transformation was astonishingly faster. The comparison was 12 minutes and 20 hours, just for you to have this feeling, to control to the same accuracy. So this type of comparisons showed us that there was a survival, there was a revival. Survival is even not the right word. The word I put here, revival and growth of analytic inspired methods. So you can sit down today and wait for the computer to get faster and faster. It's going to happen. It's going to take a while. It's going to go in little jumps until it gets to a bigger jump. Or you can do something in terms of method. If we didn't change the method of solving algebraic equations, and we use Kramer rules, still now, we would be in big trouble because it's very inefficient. It's very slow. So some people worked in the methods until we reached the quality of algorithm that we have now. So mixing analytical and numerical concepts, and that's just one possibility. There are hundreds of other possibilities. I'm sure people mix, the control people mix Laplace transform with numerical integration schemes brilliantly. So there are several other possibilities, several other niches where we could do a better job in terms of simulation.
Thank you. So let's thank Professor Cotta one more time. Little thing just to remember the lecture.
Thank you very much.
And then we'll take another photo with Jack and with us to put it on our website. Again, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it, and this is really wonderful. All right, that concludes our Ozisik lecture this year. Please tell how great it was to all the people who missed it. Thank you.